The blessings we often seek aren't always far away. Many times, they're hidden in life's simple moments, waiting for us to notice them with gratitude. If you've faced or are facing challenging times and are looking for inspiration to transform your life, this story is for you. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this heartfelt journey of faith and resilience. Clara woke up every day before sunrise, to the sound of chickens and the smell of fresh earth filling the small cabin she called home. Her routine started early, and before she could even let out a proper yawn, her bare feet were already on the cold floor, carrying buckets of water to the fields. Life in the village was hard, but Clara always felt like it was even harder for her. While the other villagers sang hymns as they worked or exchanged smiles in the square at the end of the day, Clara felt like she was the only one truly exhausted. She couldn't understand how they seemed so content. Every seed she planted felt like it stole a piece of her hope, as if the soil itself was a constant reminder of how barren and fruitless her life had become. "Why doesn't God see me?" she muttered, running her fingers through the messy bun holding her hair in place. "I pray, I work, but my life stays the same." Clara couldn't remember the last time she had prayed sincerely. Her prayers were full of demands and complaints. She wanted more than the village could offer, more than the simple life that seemed to satisfy everyone else. That particular morning, as she hoisted yet another basket of corn onto her shoulder, Clara heard the village women singing as they washed clothes by the nearby stream. The sound irritated her deeply. "It's easy to sing when you don't feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders," she thought, not realizing how bitter her words had become. That evening, Clara sat alone on the porch of her cabin. The full moon lit up the peak of a distant mountain, a place that had always seemed mysterious and unreachable. Yet, in that moment, something stirred inside her. That mountain seemed like more than just a pile of rocks, it felt like a promise. A whisper in her heart told her that if she could make it there, she might find the answers she had been searching for. But the thought was quickly swallowed by doubt. "It's crazy," she muttered. "I barely have the strength to make it through my daily life, let alone climb a mountain." That night, as Clara tried to sleep, the longing to reach the mountain grew stronger. She closed her eyes, and a timid, stubborn resolve began to take shape. If her life felt so empty and meaningless, maybe it was time to challenge the chains that held her back. And so, before the first light of dawn could brighten the village, Clara was tying her worn-out shoes, a small bag in hand. Without telling anyone, she took her first steps toward the mountain, unaware that the journey ahead would not only change her life but also transform her heart. Clara's first steps toward the mountain were cautious. She knew the village's borders well and was familiar with the trails surrounding the fields, but she had never ventured beyond those familiar limits. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the crisp morning air brought brief relief to the unease growing in her chest. "Maybe this is madness," she thought as she watched the fields fade into the distance. Yet something inside her pushed her forward, an inexplicable yearning to escape the monotony and perhaps discover something greater than her own life. The trail grew steeper and less defined, forcing Clara to slow her pace. The weight of her bag seemed to double with every step, and exhaustion began to creep into her body. She sat on a stone at the edge of the path, trying to catch her breath. That's when she realized she wasn't alone. "It's a beautiful morning for a walk, isn't it?" A man's voice startled her, seemingly out of nowhere. She quickly turned to see a man sitting on a fallen log, a walking stick resting by his side. He was tall, plainly dressed in worn traveler's clothes. His demeanor was calm but piercing, as though he could see more than what met the eye. "Who are you? And why are you here?" Clara asked, her tone more defensive than she had intended. "My name is Andrew," he replied with a faint smile. And I'm here because sometimes you need to leave where you are to find what truly matters. Clara frowned. That doesn't make any sense. Andrew shrugged. Do you know why you're here, Clara? The question caught her off guard. How do you know my name? Let's just say destiny has a way of surprising us, he said, his gaze shifting to the mountain ahead. But it's not about who I am or how I know your name. The real question is, what are you looking for? Clara hesitated. It was a question she couldn't answer herself. I don't know. I just know I couldn't take that life anymore. I needed something different. I understand, Andrew said, standing and picking up his walking stick. Sometimes running away feels like the only option. But the real question is, are you ready to face what truly holds you back? Clara didn't respond. Something about Andrew's tone unsettled her, as if he knew more than he was letting on. I'm heading to the mountain, he said casually as he began to walk. You can join me if you like. But I warn you, the journey won't be easy. Clara watched him for a moment, feeling a mix of curiosity and mistrust. She knew better than to trust strangers, yet there was something about Andrew that intrigued her. Maybe it was the calm way he spoke or how he seemed to understand her deepest thoughts. I don't need help, Clara said, trying to sound resolute. Of course not, Andrew replied without looking back. But sometimes help isn't about need. It's about choice. Clara stood there, watching him walk away. Something inside her wrestled with the pride that insisted she walk alone. With a heavy sigh, she adjusted her bag on her shoulder and started after him. As they climbed together, Clara noticed that while the path seemed easier with Andrew by her side, he asked questions that stirred her deepest fears and insecurities. What unsettled her most, though, was the feeling that Andrew knew exactly what awaited her on the mountain, and that it would change her life forever. The sun was high in the sky by the time Clara began regretting her decision to follow Andrew. He walked with an infuriating ease, while she struggled to keep up. The trail had grown steeper, and every muscle in her body screamed in protest. This is ridiculous, she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Why didn't you tell me it would be this hard? Andrew, ahead of her, turned calmly. What did you expect? That the path to something greater would be smooth and effortless? Clara huffed but didn't reply. With every step, it felt like the weight of her bag was doubling, and her irritation with Andrew grew. He continued walking silently, as though more interested in the scenery around them than in her struggles. Why don't you even look tired? She finally blurted, exasperated. Maybe because I've learned not to carry more than I need, he replied, casting her a meaningful glance. Clara glanced down at her bag, suddenly aware of how she had stuffed it with things she might not even need, extra clothes, tools, even a small book she hadn't read in months. But admitting that Andrew might be right was out of the question. It's easy for you to say when you're not the one struggling to get there, she snapped. Andrew merely smiled. We all have our struggles, Clara. But what matters isn't the weight we carry, it's how we choose to carry it. His words lingered in her mind, but before she could respond, the trail grew even more treacherous. Slippery rocks and exposed roots made every step a challenge. Clara stumbled several times, and with each fall, her frustration mounted. This is insane, she shouted, sitting down on a rock. I don't even know why I'm doing this. Andrew stopped and turned to face her. Because you want something different. But the problem isn't the path, Clara. It's what you're bringing with you. She narrowed her eyes. So now it's my fault? It's not about fault, Andrew said calmly. It's about choice. You can keep complaining, or you can take a hard look at what's really holding you back. His words stung, but Clara couldn't deny he was right. Deep down, she knew the mountain wasn't the real issue, it was how she viewed everything around her. Without a word, Clara opened her bag and began removing everything that wasn't essential. She left behind the extra clothes, some tools, and even the book she'd thought to bring. When she stood, her load felt lighter, though she was still reluctant to admit it helped. Andrew smiled, as if he could read her thoughts. Better, isn't it? She ignored him and began walking again, this time with steadier steps. But as they moved forward, something began to shift. Despite her exhaustion, Clara noticed small details she'd overlooked before, the gentle sound of a nearby stream, the cool breeze brushing her face, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. Still, one thought lingered in her mind: what awaited her at the top of the mountain? And, more importantly, why did Andrew seem so sure she needed to reach it? That night, as Clara rested under the stars, Andrew posed one final question before they both drifted off to sleep. Clara, what if what you're looking for isn't at the top of the mountain but has been inside you all along? The question unsettled her, leaving her awake and filled with doubts. The dawn brought an unsettling feeling. Clara opened her eyes and immediately realized something was wrong. Andrew was gone. The walking stick he had carried was leaning against a nearby tree, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Great, Clara muttered, trying to suppress the rising panic in her chest. He said the journey would be hard, but he didn't mention abandoning me halfway. She glanced around, attempting to get her bearings. The trail had split into several paths, each one equally unmarked and confusing. The silence was overwhelming, pressing down on her like a heavy weight. I don't need him, she said aloud, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I can do this on my own. Choosing a path at random, Clara started walking. Her steps were firm at first, but as the hours passed, exhaustion and loneliness began to settle in. She realized there was no one to hear her complaints, no one to reassure her that she was on the right, or wrong, track. The silence seemed to amplify her thoughts, forcing her to confront truths she'd been avoiding. Why was she always looking for someone else to blame for her problems? Why was she never content, even when things were going well? The solitude brought these questions to the surface, and Clara realized that no matter how far she walked, they followed her like shadows, waiting to be addressed. As she continued along the trail, the terrain grew more challenging. Loose rocks made every step precarious, and the blazing sun scorched her skin. Clara's frustration mounted, and she began to fear she was walking in circles. Why did I even get myself into this? She muttered, her voice cracking as tears welled in her eyes. I should have stayed in the village where everything was easier. She collapsed onto a rock, exhausted, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't fight the tears. Sitting there alone and vulnerable, Clara let the weight she'd been carrying in her heart pour out. Then, she remembered something her mother used to tell her as a child: when you don't know where to go, talk to God. He always listens, even when you don't believe it. Clara hesitated. She hadn't truly prayed in years. Her words had become hollow complaints, and her faith felt distant. But in that moment, surrounded by silence, she decided to try. God, she began, her voice shaky. I don't know if you're still listening to me. But I need help. I don't know what to do or where to go. If you're with me, please, give me a sign. The silence persisted. Clara waited, but no answer came. Yet somehow, the simple act of asking lifted a small weight off her shoulders. When she stood to continue, she noticed a soft glimmer on the ground ahead. It was a small stream, hidden by the thick vegetation. Clara rushed to it, dropping to her knees to drink the cool, fresh water. An unexpected gratitude welled up in her chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she whispered, "Thank you." As Clara splashed water on her face, she caught sight of a figure in the distance, barely visible in the fading light of dusk. It was hard to tell who, or what, it was, but as she looked up, a chill ran down her spine. Something, or someone, seemed to be waiting for her. Clara remained kneeling by the stream, her eyes locked on the figure in the distance. The twilight framed the silhouette, which seemed to move slowly toward her, yet somehow remained cloaked in an ethereal glow. Time itself seemed to slow. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and fascination rooting her in place. For a brief moment, she thought about running, but something about the figure's presence calmed her. It was as if an invisible force assured her she wasn't in danger. As the figure drew closer, Clara saw it was a man with a serene expression and deeply compassionate eyes. He wore simple garments, but a soft, radiant glow seemed to emanate from him. He wasn't like anyone Clara had ever encountered. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am a messenger," he said, his voice resonating as though it spoke directly to her soul. "I've come to you because your prayers have finally been heard." Clara froze, stunned. "My prayers?" "Yes," he replied, his gentle smile unwavering. "For so long, you murmured and complained, but yesterday, for the first time in years, you asked for help. And more importantly, you gave thanks." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from despair. It was a feeling she couldn't quite name, something between awe and humility. "I don't understand," she said. "I only prayed because I was desperate. And I gave thanks, well, just for finding the water. And that's where it begins, Clara. Gratitude is like a seed. When you plant it, it grows and transforms everything around it. But until now, you've been watering your life with bitterness." Clara felt a pang in her heart. The messenger's words rang true, and she knew it. She had spent so much of her time blaming others, her work, and her simple life. Everything had been an excuse for her discontent. "I don't know how to change," she admitted, her voice breaking. "You've already begun to change, Clara. What you're searching for on the mountain isn't there. It's here," he said, placing a hand gently over her chest. "True transformation happens in the heart. But you need to learn to trust, to forgive, and to see blessings even in the struggles." Clara looked down, overwhelmed by his words. "But why does my life have to be so hard? Why can't I have what others have?" The messenger tilted his head, as if weighing her question. "Clara, blessings don't come to those who simply wait for them. They come to those who open their eyes to see them. The hard work you despise is what gives you strength. The challenges you face are tools God uses to shape you. But your murmurs have blocked the blessings meant for you." The messenger's words struck her like lightning. She had never considered that her constant complaints might be what was holding her back from receiving the joy she longed for. "So, what do I do now?" she asked, feeling more vulnerable than ever. "You do what you began yesterday, give thanks. Thank Him for the small things, the big things, the hardships, and the joys. Trust that God is with you every step of the way. Only then will you see how your life can be transformed." Before Clara could respond, the messenger began to walk away, but not before leaving her with one final message. Continue to the top of the mountain, Clara. Not because there's something waiting for you there, but because the journey will strengthen the change that has begun within you. And remember, God has never left your side, not even for a moment. Clara stood there, alone once more, but she felt different. The loneliness that had once crushed her now seemed smaller, replaced by a flicker of hope. As she rose to her feet, she looked toward the mountain's peak and, for the first time, felt she had the strength to reach it. The path ahead appeared more challenging than ever, but this time, Clara didn't feel like she was walking it alone. With a heart heavy with reflection but strangely lighter than before, Clara resumed her journey. The mountain now seemed even taller, as if the weight of her emotions forced her to face each step with deliberate care. The messenger's words echoed in her mind: give thanks. Trust. See the blessings. At first, she struggled to follow that advice. The path was full of loose stones, and the cold wind made the climb even harder. Each stumble felt like an invitation to complain, but Clara would close her eyes and whisper, "Thank you." Sometimes, it was simply for not getting hurt when she tripped, other times, it was for something as small as a cool breeze easing the heat of her climb. The change was subtle but real. With every prayer of gratitude, Clara felt a renewed inner strength. The trail seemed less daunting, and the small challenges no longer made her want to give up. That's when she saw something ahead, a fork in the road. One path was wide and appeared easier to follow, while the other was narrow, overgrown with bushes and sharp rocks. Clara hesitated. Everything in her wanted to choose the easier path, but a soft voice in her mind reminded her, the easiest path isn't always the right one. Taking a deep breath, she chose the more difficult trail. Every step felt like a test of her resolve. Thorns scratched her hands, and slippery rocks threatened her footing. Yet, with each obstacle she overcame, Clara felt something growing within her, a confidence that didn't come from her own strength but from the certainty that she wasn't walking alone. Finally, the challenging trail opened into a clearing, where Clara stumbled upon something that made her stop in her tracks. A small bush bloomed among the rocks, its radiant petals reflecting the sunlight. It was an unexpected sight, a touch of beauty in the midst of the harsh landscape. Clara knelt before the bush and smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you, God," she said aloud. "Thank you for showing me that even in the hardest places, beauty can bloom." As she continued her journey, Clara began noticing things she would have overlooked before. A bubbling brook breaking the silence, a bird singing atop a tree, even the fresh scent of the earth after a gentle breeze. These small miracles became fuel for her soul, and Clara realized that the more she gave thanks, the more she could see the blessings around her. But the journey wasn't without trials. A storm began forming on the horizon, bringing dark clouds and ominous thunder. Fear crept back into her heart. What if the storm caught her off guard? What if she couldn't find shelter in time? "God, I'm trusting you," she said, quickening her pace. The rain began as a light drizzle but soon turned into a downpour, soaking her clothes and making the ground slippery and treacherous. Clara spotted a small, cramped cave ahead and hurried inside for shelter. As she listened to the storm rage outside, she reflected on everything she had learned so far. She was still far from the mountain's peak, but something inside her had already changed profoundly. When the storm finally passed, Clara stepped out of the cave and looked up at the clear sky. But as her eyes returned to the trail, she saw something unexpected, a familiar shadow. Someone was standing further up the path, as if waiting for her. Deep down, Clara knew that her next encounter would bring answers she wasn't yet ready to face. The figure ahead stood still, like a shadow against the sunlight that illuminated the rain-soaked trail. Clara felt a chill, though not from fear. There was something familiar about the presence, as if deep down, she had always known this moment had been prepared for her long ago. With cautious steps, she approached, and as the distance shrank, the silhouette came into focus. It was Andrew. He stood there, leaning on the same staff he had carried when they first met. His expression was calm, and his deep, mysterious eyes seemed to hold secrets Clara couldn't yet understand. "I knew you'd make it this far," he said with a smile. Clara stopped, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. "You left me alone. I thought I wouldn't survive without your help." "You needed to walk alone for a while, Clara," he replied. "You needed to discover that the strength you're looking for isn't in me or anyone else. It's in you and the faith you carry." She opened her mouth to respond but stopped. His words made sense, and everything she had experienced so far confirmed them. "Why are you here now?" she finally asked. "Because the summit is just ahead." Andrew gestured toward the trail behind him. Clara followed his gaze and saw the mountain's peak at last, only a few steps away. "I can do it on my own," Clara said, with a confidence she had never felt before. Andrew nodded, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I know you can. But remember, what you'll see up there isn't an end, it's a beginning." Without waiting for further explanation, Clara walked past Andrew and continued toward the summit. Each step felt lighter than the last, and when she finally reached the top, the sight took her breath away. The view before her was extraordinary. The village where she lived looked tiny in the distance, surrounded by golden fields and winding rivers. The sunlight cast a soft, almost divine glow over everything. Beyond, other mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in clouds. The sky felt closer than ever. But it wasn't just the view that overwhelmed her. It was the deep sense of peace filling her heart. For the first time in years, Clara felt that everything made sense. She knelt, tears streaming down her face, though not from sadness. "Thank you, God," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I couldn't see how much I needed you." As she prayed, Clara felt a gentle breeze around her. When she opened her eyes, she realized she wasn't alone. The messenger had returned, his presence glowing with the same soft light as before. "Do you understand now, Clara?" he asked, his voice as calm and kind as ever. "I do," she said, wiping her tears. "I've been looking at the wrong things all along. I wanted to change what was around me, but what needed to change was my heart." The messenger nodded. "Exactly. Gratitude isn't about what you have or what you lack. It's about seeing the blessings that already exist, even in the hardest places. And when you learn to do that, God can open paths you never imagined." Clara felt an indescribable peace. "And now? What do I do next?" "You go back down the mountain," the messenger said. "But this time, you take something with you. What you've learned here isn't just for you, Clara. It's for all those still trapped in the darkness of dissatisfaction and lack of faith." Clara looked toward the village in the distance. For a moment, she felt the weight of returning to her simple routine. But the messenger interrupted her thoughts. "Remember, Clara, the mountain is only the beginning. The real journey starts now." Before she could respond, the messenger disappeared, dissolving into the air like a ray of light. Clara was alone again, but this time, the solitude didn't frighten her. She knew God was with her. With one last glance at the mountain's peak, Clara began her descent. But as she made her way down, something extraordinary happened. Along the path, she encountered others climbing, their faces weary and lost, just as hers had been. She realized they were searching for something, and that her mission now was to help them find what she had discovered. Clara descended the mountain with steady steps and a renewed heart. What once felt like an unbearable burden now felt light, almost as if the strength carrying her wasn't hers alone. Every stone on the path and every curve in the trail reminded her of the journey she had taken and the transformation she had undergone. As she reached the outskirts of the village, a mix of emotions stirred within her. On one hand, she was eager to share what she had learned, on the other, she feared the people might not understand her transformation. Clara knew many of them were still trapped in the same cycle of dissatisfaction and complaints she had once lived. When she arrived at the village square, everything looked exactly as she remembered, men and women going about their daily tasks, children running and laughing sporadically. But to Clara, everything now seemed different. It wasn't the scene that had changed, but the way she saw it. Her first stop was the home of Dona Rosa, an older neighbor who had always been like a second mother to her. When Dona Rosa opened the door, she greeted Clara with a warm smile. "Clara, I thought you'd left us for good. What happened to you?" Clara sat down and calmly began to share her story, her decision to climb the mountain, the challenges she had faced, her encounters with Andrew, and most importantly, the messenger's words. She spoke about how gratitude had transformed the way she viewed her life. "I realized I was so caught up in complaining that I couldn't see how much God was already at work in my life, Dona Rosa. I couldn't see the blessings because I was blind to them. But now, everything is different." Dona Rosa listened intently, tears welling in her eyes. "My dear, that is a miracle. And you needed this journey to see what so many of us forget: God is with us, even when everything feels difficult." In the days that followed, Clara began talking to others in the village. She didn't give grand speeches or formal sermons. She simply shared her story, sitting with neighbors while they worked or chatting in the square, always with a genuine smile and words of encouragement. Slowly, Clara noticed something extraordinary. People's attitudes began to change. Conversations that were once full of complaints now included words of gratitude. Community prayers, which had become a formality for many, were once again filled with faith and sincerity. Above all, Clara saw families coming together, reconciliations taking place, and a new atmosphere of hope spreading through the village. One day, while walking through the fields, Clara encountered Andrew again. He was sitting on a rock, holding the same staff, his expression calm as always. "I knew you'd make a difference here," he said before she could even speak. "I never imagined something as simple as gratitude could change so much," Clara replied, sitting beside him. "Gratitude isn't simple, Clara. It's powerful. When you begin to see God's blessings, you don't just change your own life, you change the lives of everyone around you." Clara smiled, knowing he was right. "And now," she asked, "the mountain journey is over, but I feel like there's still so much to do." Andrew nodded. "The mountain was only the beginning. Your mission now is to keep sharing what you've learned. Teach people to see beyond their struggles and find God in the small things." Before Clara could respond, Andrew stood and began walking toward the trail leading back to the mountain. She watched him disappear over the horizon, certain that he was more than just a traveler. He was part of the divine plan that had transformed her life. In the months and years that followed, Clara continued to spread the message of gratitude. She helped organize community gatherings where people could share their blessings and pray together. The children grew up hearing her stories, and the village became known as a place of faith and joy, even in difficult times. Clara never complained about her life again. She knew challenges would always come, but she also knew that gratitude was the key to facing them. And every time she looked at the distant mountain, she smiled, remembering how God had guided every step of her journey. Clara's story reminds us that true transformation begins within. The blessings we search for aren't always far away. Often, they're hidden in the simple things, waiting for us to notice them with gratitude. And what about you? What small blessings might you be overlooking? Share your story in the comments. Let's spread gratitude together. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. This is Embracing Narratives. Stay blessed, and see you in the next story.